what if I told you that giving video game players, like exactly what they are begging for, is actually the mathematically fastest way to kill an entire gaming ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Right.
You would naturally assume that if a developer just caters directly to the loudest, the most dedicated voices in their community, that would basically guarantee long-term success.
Oh, absolutely.
But the empirical data we are looking at today tells a very different, much darker story about this sort of digital population collapse.
And that digital population collapse is exactly our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into the systemic failure of Bungie's 2026 revival of Marathon.
Right.
Because this was supposed to be a massive industry-defining release, but instead it kind of became a cautionary tale.
A huge one, yeah.
So to figure out the mechanics of this collapse for you guys listening, we are synthesizing a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got raw, ground-level dispatches from the community's Reddit threads, for one.
Which are always interesting to read.
Right. And we are also looking at a meticulously detailed systems analysis paper on matchmaking architecture. And then, perhaps most importantly, we actually have our hands on a highly secretive 25-page white paper from Activision.
That document is just incredible.
It really is. It completely pulls back the curtain on the behavioral science of player retention.
Yeah, and I think the Activision document is particularly revealing here because we aren't just analyzing a single video game today.
Mm-hmm.
We are really looking at a real-time case study in human psychology.
Yeah.
It's about the delicate management of digital economies and the catastrophic chain reactions that happen when developers prioritize internet clout over hard empirical data.
Exactly. So we are going to explore how catering to a vocal 1% of hardcore players created this irreversible death spiral.
Right.
We'll break down the fascinating algorithmic science behind aggression-based matchmaking. And, we'll examine the incredibly dangerous risk of giving players safe game modes.
Which is such a paradox.
It really is. But before we get to all that data, we need to establish the stakes for you. Marathon is what the industry calls an extraction shooter.
Right.
And if you aren't familiar with that genre, you really just need to understand one core rule. When you die in this game, you permanently lose all the gear your character was carrying.
Yeah, the stakes are just incredibly high by design. You load into a map, you scavenge for weapons and resources, and you try to reach an extraction point to secure your loot.
And if someone catches you...
If another player hunts you down before you extract, they take everything, literally everything you just spent hours acquiring. So the psychological sting of a loss in an extraction shooter is vastly more severe than, say, losing a quick round of a traditional deathmatch game.
Right, because you aren't just losing a match, you are losing your actual time investment.
Exactly.
So keeping players engaged in an environment that actively punishes them like that is already a super delicate balancing act.
Oh, definitely.
And to understand how Marathon lost its player base so rapidly, we really have to look at the exact moment that balance was shattered. We need to look at the collision between hardcore predators and casual prey.
Which basically brings us to Bungie's launch strategy.
Right. Level-based matchmaking.
Yeah, so when Marathon launched, Bungie made this highly publicized philosophical choice to reject skill-based matchmaking, or SBMM.
Right.
And SBMM is the industry standard system that silently calculates things like your reaction time, your accuracy, your win rate.
Oh, the sweaty stuff.
Right. And it tries to pair you with opponents of similar ability. But Bungie completely opted out of that. They claimed they wanted unpredictability.
They wanted that tension, right?
Exactly. They wanted the tension of a complete dice roll in every single encounter. So they implemented level-based matchmaking instead, LBMM.
Okay, and how did that actually work?
The system literally just looked at your account level, which is primarily a reflection of how much time you've logged in the game.
Yeah.
And it grouped you with players of a similar level.
Okay, so on paper, like to a casual observer, grouping a level 50 player with another level 50 player seems entirely logical.
Right, you'd think so.
But reading through the community threads in our sources, the reality of the extraction shooter genre just immediately broke that logic.
Yeah, the breakdown happens because extraction shooters rely heavily on extreme gear progression. Highly skilled, hyper-competitive players don't just, play the game normally.
No, they optimize it.
Exactly. They mathematically optimize it. In the first few weeks, these veterans memorized the most efficient loot routes, they rapidly hit level 50, and they secured the absolute top-tier legendary gear.
And specifically, they acquired those gold-tier shields.
Right, the gold shields.
Meanwhile, to put this in perspective for you listening, imagine your own schedule.
Yeah.
If you only have a few hours to play on weekends, you might also eventually hit level 50.
Eventually, yeah.
But you get there really slowly, maybe over a month, doing low-risk missions, avoiding major
Just
firefights.
kind of scraping by.
Exactly. You arrive at level 50 still wearing basic low-tier gear. So the matchmaking algorithm looks at the hardcore veteran and the weekend player, sees the number 50 next to both of their names, and just throws them into the exact same lobby.
Which creates a total systemic failure point.
Yeah.
Let's actually look at the raw statistical disparity outlined in the systems analysis paper here.
Yeah, hit me with the numbers.
Okay, so the gold tier shields in Marathon offer a 2.8 times health multiplier compared to base gear. And that comes along with maximum healing efficiency.
Wow. Okay, let's break down the actual mechanics of a 2.8 health multiplier because that number is just staggering.
It's massive.
Right. So if my basic weapon does 10 damage per bullet, and the veteran's high-tier weapon also does 10 damage per bullet.
Assuming equal weapons, yeah.
Right. I have 100 health, and they have 280 health.
Yep.
So they only need to land 10 shots to eliminate me, but I have to land 28 shots on them.
Which is almost a full magazine in most of these games.
Exactly. Assuming our weapons fire at the exact same speed, I lose that firefight every single time unless they literally put their controller down and walk away to make a sandwich.
Yeah, the systems architects call that an insurmountable numbers check.
A numbers check, yeah.
Because it completely erodes what the community calls outplay potential. In a healthy tactical shooter, a low-geared player should theoretically be able to outsmart a high-geared player.
Right, if you play smart.
Exactly. You find a flanking route, you set up a brilliant tactical ambush, and you shoot him in the back. Under normal circumstances, that superior positioning should be rewarded with a win.
But because of that math we just talked about, the ambush is totally useless.
Completely useless.
I mean, I could empty half a magazine into their back, and because of that 2.8 health multiplier, they have ample time to realize they are being shot, turn completely around, locate me, and then use their vastly superior weaponry to just drain my standard health bar.
Yeah.
Like, I am actively punished for doing everything right.
And when you remove the ability for a clever underdog to win, you give birth to what the systems paper identifies as the stomper cycle.
The stomper cycle.
Elite players quickly realized that the matchmaking algorithm had effectively made them invincible against the average player in their level bracket.
And the Reddit sources document this cycle really extensively. Because the elites realized they couldn't be killed by casuals, they just stopped playing Marathon as an extraction shooter altogether.
Right, the whole scavenging aspect vanished.
They stopped sneaking around, they ignored the quest objectives, they didn't even bother looting the high-value areas anymore, they just treated the map like a giant arcade shooter.
Just pure aggression.
Exactly. Sprinting aggressively from spawn point to spawn point, hunting down every other player to basically wipe the lobby clean.
Yeah, and the sources specifically cite a streamer known as Saywalla for this.
Oh, right, the Saywalla example.
Players observe this streamer effortlessly wiping lobbies in minutes. The behavior is purely predatory. They leave the entire map completely devoid of other players.
Just a ghost town.
While the casuals who are simply trying to gather basic materials to build a med kit or something are left staring at a game over screen having lost all their gear.
There's this analogy from the community forums that perfectly captures the mechanical absurdity of the situation. They said LBMM forces Timmy, who is this natural-born competitive FPS veteran who's been playing shooters daily for a decade.
Right, an absolute god at the game.
Into the exact same success bracket as a player whose only other gaming experience is farming crops in Stardew Valley.
Which is just so funny to picture.
Right, merely because they both have 40 hours logged in this specific software.
Yeah, that analogy really highlights the core fallacy of equating time spent with skill acquired.
I actually want to take that analogy further to really illuminate the gear gap for you listening.
Okay.
Because it's not just pitting a local neighborhood Little League team against the New York Yankees, because both have played baseball for 5 years.
Right.
To represent that 2.8 health multiplier, the Yankees are stepping up to the plate with mathematically engineered titanium bats. While the Little League team is literally handed rolled up newspapers, the mechanics of the game itself ensure the outcome before the pitch is even thrown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And think about the psychological toll that takes on the consumer.
Well, it has to be brutal.
If you're a 9-to-5 worker, your free time is your most valuable commodity. You spend 20 minutes meticulously sneaking through a digital swamp, managing your inventory, trying to complete a basic fetch objective.
Just trying to relax a bit.
And then You are instantly vaporized by an untouchable death squad sprinting through the area. You lose your gear, but more importantly, you lose your 20 minutes of progress.
It's awful.
The system actively disrespects your time. So, the logical response isn't to hit the firing range and play better.
No.
The logical response is to uninstall the software.
And the data shows they absolutely did uninstall. The player base just plummeted. Which brings us to the most fiercely debated topic in our sources today, which is the demand for skill-based matchmaking.
Right, the SBMM debate.
The hardcore marathon influencers and streamers were incredibly vocal about this. They claimed that implementing SBMM ruins video games.
That's always the argument, yeah.
Their whole argument was that matching players by skill makes every match too competitive, too exhausting, and it just destroys the casual fun of the genre.
And this is where we get to transition from community sentiment to empirical behavioral science.
Yes, the Activision paper.
Because we don't have to guess what happens when a major developer capitulates to that specific influencer feedback and turns SBMM off. Activision secretly ran that exact experiment.
It's so crazy that we have this data.
And the methodology is fully documented in their 25-page white paper.
This document completely changes the context of the conversation, honestly, because if SBMM is universally hated by loud influencers and Reddit communities, you really have to wonder why massive publishers like Activision insist on spending millions of dollars to develop and maintain these algorithms.
Right, there has to be a financial incentive.
Yeah, exactly. There has to be a financial imperative to keep doing it. And the A/B test in this paper reveals exactly what that imperative is.
The methodology of that A/B test is so crucial to understand. So in early 2024, Activision took 50% of their North American player base for Call of Duty. Modern Warfare third,
50%.
half the base, yeah. And using the North American servers, isolated regional ping variables, which gave them this massive, incredibly stable sample size.
Okay.
For a 2-week period, they covertly deprioritized skill-based matchmaking for that specific half of the population.
Turn down the dials.
Exactly. They loosened the algorithm's constraints, allowing high-skill and low-skill players to mix far more freely.
And the results were just catastrophic for the ecosystem. The telemetry data showed that returning player rates dropped significantly for 90% of the population.
90%.
To put that in plain English for you, 90% of the player base had a measurably worse time and were less likely to log back in when skill was removed from the matchmaking equation.
Yeah, and the granular data on the remaining 10% is the real key to understanding this whole influencer mentality.
Okay, break that down.
Only the top 10% of elite players saw an increase in their return rates and a decrease in their match quit rates. When SBMM was turned off, the telemetry recorded a massive spike in blowouts, which are matches where one team wins by a massively disproportionate margin.
Just total stomp.
Total stomps. And concurrently, a metric called kills per minute for the bottom 30% of players completely triggered.
Wow. So, to put that in perspective for you listening, if you are an average player who only logs on occasionally, you likely fall into that bottom 30%.
Yeah, most people do.
Right. So without SBMM protecting you, your kills per minute drops to near zero. You aren't actually participating in the mechanics of the game anymore. You exist merely as digital target practice, generated just to entertain the top 10%.
Exactly. And the white paper identifies the systemic result of this as a negative feedback loop.
The negative feedback loop.
This is the actual mathematical mechanism behind a digital population death spiral. When that absolute bottom 10% of players spends 2 weeks getting continuously farmed by veterans, their frustration vastly outweighs their engagement.
And they abandon the game.
They leave, yeah.
I'm looking at the logical progression of that loop, and it's kind of terrifying. If the absolute bottom 10% uninstalls the game, then the players who were previously in the 20th percentile suddenly find themselves at the very bottom of the remaining matchmaking pool.
Right.
Like, the floor literally collapses out from under them.
That is the exact mathematical consequence. The former 20th percentile becomes the new bottom 10%.
Oh, man.
Now, the predators who were farming the original bottom tier just shift their focus to this new lowest tier. This new group gets farmed, their kills per minute metric plummets, they get frustrated, and then they uninstall.
So it's a collapsing floor that just keeps moving upwards.
It slowly works its way up the entire skill distribution bell curve. The systems analysis points out that if a developer allows this loop to run unchecked, eventually a player who used to be in the top 10% will find the floor collapsing under them too.
Because everyone beneath them is gone.
Right. Pushing them down to become the new bottom tier relative to the absolute elite. It just continues until the only people left in the matchmaking pool are the most hyper-competitive, aggressive players in the world playing in a functionally dead ecosystem.
That is wild. And honestly, this data exposes a massive hypocrisy in the community discourse. The hardcore players who advocated for removing SBMM claim they just wanted a fair, connection-based environment where they could relax.
Right. They just wanted to chill.
But the Activision telemetry proves that their version of relaxing actually requires the system to systematically feed them weaker players to dominate.
And the white paper includes a secondary test that completely confirms this behavior.
Oh, the reverse test.
Yeah. Activision ran a separate A/B test where they actually tightened the SBMM constraints. They turned the skill matching up.
Okay, and what happened?
In that scenario, the high-skill players began quitting matches at significantly higher rates,
Of course they did.
while the lower-skill players remained highly engaged. The elites actively reject fair competition. Managing this algorithm is an incredibly delicate balancing act for engineers, but the data is totally conclusive. Severely deprioritizing skill metrics is a proven death sentence for a live service game.
There is a really profound observation from one of the Reddit sources that contextualizes this perfectly. A user pointed out that removing SBMM creates a digital meritocracy that closely mirrors unregulated real-world capitalism.
That was an interesting post.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we are not endorsing any political or economic theories here. We're just impartially reporting what the source argued.
Of course.
But the user said that without systemic guardrails, the wealth, which in Marathon translates to high-tier loot, map control, and survival funnels entirely to the top 1%.
Right.
The rich get richer by effortlessly farming the lower classes, and the poor are continuously crushed into the dirt with absolutely no mathematical avenue for upward mobility.
The parallel is very accurate mechanically. Without algorithmic protections, the digital economy just centralizes in the hands of the apex predators.
Right, but I actually want to challenge the premise of SBMM for a second, just based on what a listener might naturally be thinking.
Okay, go for it.
Because if the system is perfectly tuned and it matches me flawlessly with a clone of my exact skill level, isn't every single firefight going to be a grueling 50-50 coin toss?
Right, the sweaty argument.
Doesn't that turn the game into an exhausting, high-stress Olympic final for casual players, too?
It is a super common concern, but the telemetry data reveals a flaw in that assumption. The experience of a perfectly matched game scales very differently depending on where you sit on the skill curve.
How so?
For a casual player, playing against other casuals does not feel like an Olympic final. The engagements are messy, aim is clumsy, tactical positioning is flawed on both sides, and mistakes are frequent.
It's just chaos.
Exactly. It feels like a chaotic, unpredictable fight where both players genuinely have a chance to survive.
So the stress comes from the execution of high-level mechanics, not just the parity of the match.
Precisely. The only people who feel the exhausting Olympic effect when SBMM is active are the top 10%.
Because they never miss.
Right. They complain about the game being sweaty because their peers punish mistakes instantly. They can no longer relax because a single misstep against an equally skilled elite player results in immediate death.
Wow.
So for the elite, SBMM makes the game objectively more stressful. But for the remaining 90% of the population, SBMM is the foundational baseline that makes the game playable in the first place.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So a skill-based algorithm mathematically fixes the gap in physical execution. It ensures a weekend player using a controller isn't matched against someone with aimbot-level mouse reflexes.
Yes.
But extraction shooters have a second, much more complex layer of friction, which is behavioral intent.
The psychological divide between how different groups want to experience the digital space.
Exactly. When you spawn into an extraction map, the tension comes from the unknown. You see another player in the distance. You have no idea if they are just trying to complete a PvE player versus environment quest by killing AI monsters, or if they logged in specifically to hunt human beings.
Right, the friend or foe dilemma.
This was the core friction that tore the Marathon community apart. But the systems analysis paper points to another game in the genre, ARC Raiders, which seemingly solved this behavioral clash using a system called aggression-based matchmaking, or ABMM.
Yeah, ARC Raider serves as a brilliant mechanical counterexample to Marathon here. The developers, Embark Studios, recognize that mechanical skill is only half the equation in a sandbox game.
Right.
To stabilize player retention, they engineered an algorithm that actually analyzes the behavioral footprint a player leaves in the world.
And Embark Studios' CEO, Patrick Soderlund, actually went on record confirming that ABMM isn't just a community myth. It is the foundational architecture of their matchmaking. And we aren't talking about a simple toggle switch where you declare yourself friendly or hostile in a menu. The analysis in our sources breaks down how this algorithm dynamically tracks incredibly specific behavioral variables in real time.
And the sophistication of the tracking is just impressive. The algorithm constantly monitors your AI-to-player damage ratio.
Okay, explain how that works.
So, if your telemetry shows that over your last 10 matches, you dealt 15,000 damage to AI enemies and 0 damage to human players, the system heavily weights your profile toward the PvE end of the spectrum.
Okay, so it knows you aren't hunting players, and then it also analyzes the context of a firefight, specifically tracking first shot identification.
Yes, the contextual tracking is vital. The algorithm needs to differentiate between an instigator who actively hunts and a victim who is merely returning fire.
Right, who started it.
Exactly. It measures who initiated the combat loop. Furthermore, it tracks proximity data. If the server registers that you frequently occupy the same physical space as non-hostile players without aiming your weapon or firing, your behavioral rating shifts toward cooperation.
That is amazing.
It goes as far as tracking positive social credit mechanically rewarding players who use medical items, like defibrillators, to revive downed strangers they encounter in the wild.
It essentially functions like a dynamic, unseen social credit score operating beneath the surface of a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
The mechanism here acts like a semi-permeable membrane in a biological cell.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
It automatically sorts the population based on the behavioral friction they create. The players who adopt a shoot-on-sight or SOS mentality, the bloodthirsty looters, are seamlessly filtered through the membrane and clustered into high-aggression lobbies populated entirely by other predators.
Which, ironically, is exactly what the hardcore PvP players claim they want. They always say they want high-stakes, relentless player-versus-player combat.
And the algorithm guarantees they get it.
Right.
On the other side of the membrane, the PvE explorers and the players who enjoy reviving strangers are filtered into what the community affectionately calls Care Bear lobbies.
Care Bear lobbies, I love that.
In these instances, the unspoken social contracts of the game are actually respected. Players use proximity voice chat to negotiate passing each other safely, and those negotiations are honored.
There's this fantastic anecdote from the ARC Raiders subreddit that visualizes the end result of this algorithm perfectly.
Oh, the pacifist run.
Yes. A player decided to test the boundaries of the system. For 50 consecutive matches, they refused to fire a single bullet at another human being.
That takes some dedication.
It really does. If they were attacked, they simply ran away or let their character die. The algorithm absorbed this massive influx of pacifist data and eventually sorted them into lobbies so completely devoid of aggression that random squads were literally meeting up at landmarks, using voice chat to hang out, and peacefully looting the map together.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of behavioral engineering.
It really is.
It directly parallels the Skav karma system implemented in Escape from Tarkov. That system assigns a hidden numerical value to your character that increases when you cooperate with your faction and plummets when you betray them.
Okay, so it's a proven concept.
Very much so. When developers explicitly design mechanics that incentivize and reward restraint, the player base will reliably adopt those positive social interactions.
Okay, I understand how it tracks the raw numbers, but I have a major question regarding the mechanics of self-defense.
Okay, what's the scenario?
If I am playing as a friendly explorer, minding my own business, and a highly aggressive sniper takes a shot at me from a ridge, if I pull out my rifle and successfully defend myself, does the algorithm punish me?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Do I suddenly get tagged as a killer and thrown through that membrane into the predator lobbies just because I refuse to die?
The community systems analysis addressed that exact concern, and it comes down to how the algorithm weights historical data against immediate action. The system doesn't operate on a binary did you do damage toggle. It calculates relative aggression.
Relative aggression.
Yeah. If player A has a historical profile showing a 90% human damage ratio, and player B has a 5% human damage ratio, when player B returns fire against player A, the algorithm utilizes that historical weighting.
Oh, that's smart.
It recognizes the context of the engagement, Defending yourself against an entity the server has already flagged as an instigator does not penalize your cooperative rating. The architecture is built to punish unprovoked, predatory violence, not basic survival mechanics.
That historical weighting is just a brilliant solution. So,
Yeah.
looking at the data, ABMM basically functions as the ultimate pressure valve for the extraction shooter genre.
Exactly.
It allows entirely contradictory playstyles like the hyper-competitive PvP hunters and the relaxed PvE explorers to coexist inside the same piece of software without forcing restrictive rule sets on either group.
They never even have to see each other if they don't want to.
The environment simply adapts to host your specific behavior. So knowing this technology exists, why did Bungie categorically refuse to implement it for Marathon?
The refusal was rooted in a very specific design philosophy. Bungie's game director publicly stated that Marathon's identity relied entirely on the concept of uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Yeah. The development team believed the defining emotional hook of the genre was the paranoia of an encounter. When you see a player across a courtyard, they wanted you to feel the tension of not knowing if that person is going to offer you a healing item or if they're going to put a sniper bullet through your helmet.
Okay, so they viewed the psychological pressure of not knowing who to trust as the core feature, not a bug to be smoothed out by an algorithm.
Right. They felt that if an algorithm pre-sorted the population into predictable behavioral buckets, the emergent tension of the extraction genre would be neutralized.
But because they clung to that philosophy of pure uncertainty, and because they refused to implement skill-based matchmaking to protect their casual base from the elite players with mathematical gear advantages.
The titanium bats.
Exactly. They triggered the exact population death spiral we discussed earlier. The casuals got endlessly farmed by the Stomper cycle, trust in the ecosystem completely evaporated, and the player metrics tanked.
And when the financial reality of those metrics hit, Bungie completely abandoned their philosophy and panicked.
And the nature of that panic led to a strategic pivot that matchmaking architects widely consider to be the most destructive action a live service game can take.
The hard-bordered queues.
Right. Instead of integrating a nuanced dynamic system like aggression-based matchmaking to gently sort the community over time, Bungie announced massive changes for Season 2. They instituted hard-bordered queues.
Yeah.
They fractured the game by creating completely separate, dedicated PvE-only modes where players couldn't hurt each other, alongside these watered-down PvP modes.
And the systems analysis paper devotes a massive section to critiquing this specific pivot. Architecturally, implementing hard-bordered queues in a sandbox game is a brute force solution.
It's not elegant at all.
Not at all. And the immediate mathematical consequence of that brute force approach is a phenomenon known as zero-sum cannibalization.
Zero-sum cannibalization. Let's really examine the mechanics of that, because the phrase sounds dire, but how does it actually alter the minute-to-minute experience of the game?
You have to look at how population flows within the software. When a developer introduces a perfectly safe, dedicated PvE-only mode into an ecosystem that was fundamentally designed around high-stakes risk, the population fractures instantly.
Okay.
The casual players, the explorers, and specifically the players who are exhausted from being farmed in the Stomper cycle will immediately migrate to the safe mode.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It offers them risk-free progression and the ability to finally experience the game's content without stress.
Which is an entirely rational choice. If I have 1 hour to play after work, I'm going to choose the mode that guarantees I make progress.
Absolutely. But by siphoning off that population, you are entirely removing the baseline population, the prey, from the main PvE queue. The only demographic left queuing for the standard high-stakes mode are the wolves, the hyper-aggressive, fully geared hunters.
Because that middle tier of semi-competitive or casual players is no longer there to dilute the matchmaking pool.
Exactly.
The entire ecosystem becomes relentlessly, suffocatingly sweaty.
The standard mode transforms into an environment so intensely difficult and unforgiving that it begins to drive away the moderately skilled PvP players.
Because now they're the bottom of the food chain.
Yes. Those moderate players realize they can no longer survive the concentrated elite lobbies, so they are forced into the safe PvE mode just to escape the stress. The game actively cannibalizes its own core loop.
Wow.
Furthermore, the analysis emphasizes that hard-bordered modes completely eradicate the exact emergent tension Bungie claimed they wanted to preserve in the first place.
How so?
In the PvE mode, there is no threat removing the adrenaline. In the PvP mode, there is absolutely zero trust, meaning everyone shoots on sight. The delicate magic of a genuinely unpredictable human encounter is permanently erased from both sides of the game.
The sources provide historical precedent for this exact failure cascade, too. They draw a direct comparison to the demise of the Cycle Frontier.
Oh, right.
That was another extraction shooter that failed to mathematically balance its extreme gear disparity, failed to protect solo players from elite squads, and ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own unmanaged friction.
There is also a severe logistical consequence to fracturing a dwindling player base, which the sources identify as the queue simulator problem. We saw this heavily documented in the life cycle of Delta Force.
Okay, let's walk through the math of queue simulator problem for the listener.
Imagine you have a baseline population of 100,000 active players.
Which is a lot.
It's a healthy game.
Yeah.
But if you split that population into 4 rigid, hard-bordered queues, a standard mode, a PvE-only mode, a PvP light mode, and a ranked mode, you immediately divide your pool.
Right.
Then the matchmaking algorithm has to factor in regional servers to maintain ping stability, further dividing the pool.
So,
Then it factors in local time zones and active playing hours. Suddenly, the pool of eligible players for a specific match drops from 100,000 to perhaps a few hundred.
so the algorithm physically cannot find enough appropriate players to even start a match.
Exactly. The server wait times skyrocket exponentially. Players in the Delta Force data reported sitting in matchmaking queues for 10 to 30 minutes just to launch into a single round.
30 minutes?
Yeah. When a player has to wait 30 minutes to play a 15-minute match, the friction of simply accessing the software causes mass uninstalls.
The mechanical reality of cannibalization makes perfect sense, but I have to ask the difficult question here.
Go for it.
Put yourself in the shoes of a casual player who has spent a month getting absolutely stomped into the dirt by veterans with 2.8 times health multipliers. If I am that player, I am begging for that safe PvE mode on Reddit.
Right, understandably.
I want it desperately. Why is a developer fundamentally wrong for listening to their community and giving the players exactly what they are collectively screaming for?
It is perhaps the most difficult paradox in systems design. Giving the consumer exactly what they demand is often the fastest way to destroy the long-term viability of the product.
That is such a hard pill to swallow.
It really is. The community is incredibly adept at identifying pain points. They knew the stomper cycle was ruining their experience. However, consumers are generally terrible at architecting systemic solutions. A healthy, self-sustaining digital ecosystem requires a baseline level of managed friction.
The friction is the content.
The system requires different types of players to bump into each other, to experience manageable risk, and to overcome dynamic challenges. Total isolation, which is what a hard-bordered PvE mode provides, functions like a painkiller.
Just numbing the pain.
It offers immediate, euphoric, short-term relief, but it completely fails to treat the underlying systemic disease, ultimately sacrificing long-term engagement for temporary appeasement.
It's basically treating the symptom while letting the patient bleed out. Synthesizing all of this, the granular data, the behavioral psychology, the friction between developer philosophy and community outrage, it really paints a fascinating, somewhat tragic picture of how digital worlds die.
It really does.
We have explored the mechanics of how ignoring empirical math in favor of a hardcore meritocracy inevitably breeds a stomper cycle that just eradicates casual player populations.
We examined the hard, undeniable telemetry from Activision, proving conclusively that skill-based matchmaking is not an arbitrary preference. It is a vital, load-bearing pillar required to keep the bottom 90% of a player base from uninstalling the software.
And we broke down the incredible algorithmic potential of behavioral systems like aggression-based matchmaking.
Which is just so cool.
We saw how a dynamic, semi-permeable membrane can generate organic, self-sorting harmony, while panicking and deploying hard-bordered queues mathematically cannibalizes the core identity of the extraction shooter genre.
The ultimate takeaway from these sources is that a live service game operates exactly like a fragile biological ecosystem. A developer simply cannot balance the entire forest solely around the appetites of the apex predators.
Because if they do.
If the mechanics allow the apex predators to consume all of the herbivores without restriction in week 1, the entire forest starves to death in week 2.
The forest starves to death. That analogy brings us perfectly back to the Reddit user who compared Marathon's ruthless, mathematically unfiltered gear disparity to unregulated capitalism.
It's a fitting end to the data.
It leaves us with a highly provocative concept to consider as we close out today. We log into these digital worlds to escape, to feel a sense of progression, and to have fun.
Right.
If a virtual environment is mathematically rigged by its architects so that the wealthy veterans endlessly accumulate power, the casual lower classes are systematically farmed for content, and your limited real-world time is actively disrespected by the mechanics of the software.
Yeah.
Is the ultimate final display of player agency simply refusing to participate in the simulation at all?
That is a heavy thought.
It's definitely something to carry the next time you drop into a matchmaking queue. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the mechanics behind these sources and took this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.